urinate in public.
He would allow himself to be embarrassed, to be ridiculed. He'd been faking this Howard Hughes act all these years.
Gigante was the boss of what's known as the Ivy League of organized crime.
Gigante was probably the shrewdest, most clandestine, wise guy that ever walked the streets of New York.
Throughout the 1980s, Vincent Chin Gigante could be seen shuffling along Sullivan Street in New York's Greenwich Village. He wore bedroom slippers and a tattered bathrobe. His hair was uncombed, and he sported a day's growth of gray whiskers. The average New Yorker assumed he was crazy.
He looked like he was living the life of a psychiatric invalid, a pathetic street person who otherwise would be carrying a cup.
But by the mid-1980s, state and federal investigators were beginning to think that Gigante might be very sane and very dangerous. He was often accompanied on his rambles by high-ranking members of the New York Mafia. People with names like Benny Eggs and Baldy Dom.
I don't think that any powerful wise guy from another crime family or a powerful wise guy from his own crime family would want to be seen voluntarily walking around with a person who is just deranged.
The FBI hoped to link Chin to at least 6 mafia hits and the attempted murder of mob boss John Gotti. Investigators also believed Gigante controlled the Genovese family's vast criminal enterprises, including extortion and drug running. But they needed to take the veil off his crazy act. So the FBI began to follow his every move. Vincent Gigante started his day in the afternoon. He emerged from 225 Sullivan Street, where he had lived with his mother on and off for more than 20 years. He had long been estranged from his wife. Although 6 feet tall and 200 pounds, Gigante looked like a frail, confused man. He wore a rumpled bathrobe and often held the arm of a friend or family member. Crossing Sullivan Street, he stepped inside an old storefront. Behind the creaking door and soaked windows was the headquarters of the Triangle Social Club.
The term social club is a little bit misleading. Strangers would not be permitted. There's no membership. There's no membership list. There are no dues that are taken. And these would be places for people in organized crime literally to associate.
The FBI believed that it was from here that this seemingly feeble man directed the family's violent criminal activities. Agents were desperate to put him away. Often, at around 11 p.m., a sedan would pull up outside the club. A mobster would help Gigante into the back seat and drive him to an address on Manhattan's Upper East Side. Here, Gigante had created a second family with his mistress.
This is where Chin would come late at night, sometimes 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. This was occupied by Olympia Esposito and Chin and their kids.
Late one night, I observed him with the bathrobe on, but I was close enough to him at the time to realize that underneath the bathrobe, he had a sharkskin suit on and a necktie.
Gigante's perspective on law enforcement is that they probably would much prefer to work daytime than night shifts, and he'd reduce the risk of being surveilled if he conducted his business off hours. And he was right.
In the morning, Gigante returned to his mother's home. To conceal Gigante's true role as one of the most powerful mafia dons and head of the Genovese crime family, his associates never spoke his name. If someone needed to mention him, they'd touch their chin in reference to Gigante's nickname. It was a practice that made federal wiretaps almost useless.
Gigante was a remarkably shrewd boss. He created a very formidable fortress around him that made it almost impossible to put together a case with meaningful evidence to prosecute him.
Once, when an FBI agent served a subpoena to Gigante's home, it was the agent who was surprised.
Gigante's mother let him in. The agent walked through the apartment, and when he got to the bathroom, he observed that Gigante was in the shower with the shower running, with an umbrella over his head and galoshes on.
All of his efforts to present himself as someone other than the boss of the Genovese crime family through these maneuvers were truly effective.
By November 1987, agents were investigating mob influence over Local 580 of the Ironworkers Union. They suspected that Vincent Gigante was working with other crime families to control high-level construction jobs and to fix bids on the projects. The feds used a mob underboss turned rat named Peter Savino to record conversations they hoped would incriminate Gigante.
Remember Unicio? Vincent had said when it came time to bid. Oh, okay, I'll mention him. He had said to go out and bid the work. Yes.
After listening to more than 100 hours of coded conversations about bid rigging, extortion, and other illegal schemes, agents were able to build a case against Gigante. On May 30th, 1990, FBI agents pulled up to Gigante's mother's apartment in the village. After a 2-year investigation, the FBI had enough evidence to arrest him. Gigante was wearing pinstripe pajamas and a blue bathrobe as 2 agents escorted him from the building. Now, the government's challenge was to prove that this seemingly feeble, confused man was actually a criminal mastermind of New York's Genovese crime family. In May of 1990, the FBI arrested Vincent Chin Gigante. Gigante didn't act like a man who ruled a crime family with over 1,000 made members and associates. But the government believed he had ordered 6 murders and masterminded a $1 million mafia extortion scheme. As Gigante was taken to the federal courthouse, reporters flocked to get a look at the mysterious godfather.
Out comes this disheveled, old-looking individual who's supposedly the boss of the most powerful crime family in the United States. It's just a jarring sight.
Prosecutors claimed that Gigante's erratic behavior was nothing but a ruse intended to keep him out of jail.
The only important thing to him was power, and the only way to maintain that power was not to be convicted. So he would allow himself to be embarrassed, to be actually ridiculed. He didn't care, because he knew within his own environments he was known as a godfather, and that's what counted to him.
The importance of power was something Gigante had learned about growing up on the streets of Lower Manhattan. In the early 1920s, Italian immigrants Salvatore Gigante and his wife Yolanda settled in Manhattan's Greenwich Village neighborhood.
It was an area of an Italian enclave in the vicinity of NYU and Washington Square Park. His parents had lived there almost from the first day they arrived from Naples.
Yolanda gave birth to her son Vincent on March 29, 1928. He was one of 5 children. This did not constitute a large family among the Italian immigrants in the village. In fact, there were so many children in the neighborhood The Gigantes had trouble calling Vincent home for supper.
There were several Vinnies or Vincents in the neighborhood. Everyone would get a label, Vinny Four Eyes or Vinny Long Legs. His mother always referred to him as Chinzenzo, which is a diminutive for Vincent, and he became known as Chin, Vinny Chin.
As a young boy, Chin Gigante's education began on the poor stoops and alleyways of Greenwich Village. The streets were ruled by La Cosa Nostra, or Mafia. Chin learned early that men like Vito Genovese and Lucky Luciano were to be respected and feared.
If you wanted to park your truck in a spot where it could be easily unloaded, you had to pay somebody. If you wanted to get your truck loaded quickly, you had to pay somebody.
In grammar school, Gigante was tall for his age, with broad shoulders and a stocky build. He applied the lessons he learned in the streets to the schoolyard.
He used to extort 15 cents from kids from their lunch money of the 25 cents that their parents had given them. The kids paid up. They didn't want to deal with the Chin.
In 1942, Chin Gigante dropped out after the 9th grade. At 15, he started to learn the tailor's trade.
It was not at all unusual for first-generation Italian families to encourage their children to find employment as quickly as possible.
But Gigante never worked as a tailor. Instead, he hung out in the village and looked for opportunities to make a quick buck. One possibility was neighborhood boxing matches or club fights.
You had to sell tickets. You got a percentage of the tickets you sold in the neighborhood.
Chin was good with his hands. I've heard that he won 13 out of 14 boxing matches. I've heard he won 23 out of 24. Some of those bouts, no matter what the correct numbers are, were obviously fixed. Mob guys hung out in boxing rings, always looking to get a handle or a piece on an up-and-coming young fighter.
One of those mobsters was Thomas "Tommy" Ryan Eberly. Eberly liked what he saw in the young boxer and decided to become Gigante's manager. Gigante would canvass the neighborhood, selling tickets for his matches and chatting up the locals.
I grew up in that same era. Neighborhood fighters were like stars. They were important people.
In the ring, Gigante earned a reputation as a quick-witted boxer with powerful fists. The mob took notice.
Vincent Gigante was beginning to show entrepreneurial spirit at this rather young age. He was already showing how he could work for bookmakers, how he could bring income in both for them and for himself. He was showing them that he was a good worker, he was an earner, and in fact he was making his move to be part of organized crime.
During his late teens and early 20s, Chin was a gangster in training. He did the things that all wise guy wannabes do when they're looking to move up in the life of crime and become, associated with the mob family of choice. He was involved in bookmaking. He was a runner.
Then, in 1950, at the age of 21, Gigante found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time.
He was involved in a bookmaking ring, trying to hustle bets at a college in Brooklyn. And at that time, there was a crackdown by the local district attorney.
Vincent Gigante was convicted and served 60 days in a workhouse for distributing basketball betting cards to students. When he got out, the mob welcomed him back with open arms. Over the next few years, Gigante made a living as a bookie, chauffeur, and bodyguard for the Mafia's elite. But Chin was still waiting for a chance to make his mark.